SAA's business rescue practitioners have given notice to employees that the airline will now be entering into retrenchment talks with them. Experts say any delay in the business rescue process will affect stakeholders and is something that will not bode well for the embattled airline. The director at Mazars Recovery and Restructuring, Justine Hoppe, says the restructuring plan is one that is necessary in order for the airline to get the airline back on track.
I think realistically the plan is going to set out in some detail what creditors can expect to receive for the debt that was in existence prior to the commencement of business rescue proceedings. But certainly to the extent that there's been government guarantees, there will be a responsibility to repay that old debt. And we know that a very hefty chunk of the 16.5 billion was earmarked for the repayments of historical debt, and with a view to reducing the interest which accrues in respect thereof, and will continue to place SAA under extreme financial stress to the extent that it isn't repaid.
Now, there are four possible scenarios according to the leaked draft that has been given to the various stakeholders, and we emphasize that this is a draft. This is not the plan that really will be the final plan. There are four versions of it, one of which being to save what can be saved and maintain some brand flights, retain 40% of the staff, 7.7 billion cash funding would be required, and a future maybe 4 to 6 billion rands will be required. You've got a version 2 that has got to do with stopping unprofitable flight routes, 32% of the staff being retained, and again a 7.7 billion rands cash injection with a future 4 to 6 billion rand. And the last two options is, of course, closing down SAA completely and handing over those routes to Mango to continue operating, and that would have a cash injection of 5.9 billion rand, and that of course would mean full retrenchment, saving at least about 1,300 jobs. And then the last option is complete liquidation, which of course we know at this point, according to the Deputy President, is an unlikely version to go for, because it seems the government not in with the idea of relinquishing ownership of SAA at this point.
Correct. So you can see that what the business rescue practitioners are trying to achieve is to allow the stakeholders, primarily for the purposes of the plan, it'll be the creditors of the company, to understand the options that are on the table, and perhaps more importantly, to understand the financial ramifications for each of those options. And to some extent, that will then be in the hands of the creditors come the meeting on after the publishing date on the 31st of March. Assuming that the plan remains as it currently does in draft form, there will be a meeting that will be convened for the creditors to then vote for the option that they deem most appropriate. I think, again, it's fair to say that the lenders are going to probably carry that vote. And one would imagine that the business rescue practitioners have been having extensive engagements with the lenders throughout the process, particularly, as you point out, because each of the first two options still requires a significant amount of money to be injected into the company if that option is to be implemented by the company post the adoption of the plan.
So if version 2 becomes the favorable version of stopping unprofitable flight routes, which of course has been a suggestion by the previous CEO at South African Airways, who went out, Vuyani Jagan, to say, let's stop the unprofitable routes. Of course, we've got to cut down on the staff, retain 32% of the staff, and that cash injection that needs to come from government. What is likely going to be the impact of that option on SAA? Of course, as we are talking right now, Justine, we are not talking about what are the anticipated outcomes, because we don't have that in this plan, and what is the future growth potential.
I think that if you were to go with the trimmed down version of SAA, then invariably you're going to, as you rightly point out, have the loss of, or the shutting down of the non-profitable routes, and that will invariably have a knock-on for the employee body. But I think it's important to weigh it up against the alternative two last options, each of which envisages the winding down of SAA in some form or the other. Obviously, liquidation is the most extreme of those, but even to the extent that SAA is wound down within the business rescue process, it will cease to exist once that process is completed. And to a large extent, except to the point where some of those employees might be able to move over to Mango, for instance, by far the vast majority of those employees will invariably be retrenched. In each of the first two options, SAA will look slightly differently to how it currently is structured, but there will be a saving of a significant number of jobs, and the entity will continue to fly, it'll continue to operate, and in due course, I presume the idea would be that it grows once again. Once it has been restructured, it's gone through this painful process, and it has an opportunity to go forth on a solvent and profitable basis.